what's up, everyone? This is Jacob Levy, Pod Abilities, episode number 4. Just a quick background about myself. I am a disability advocate, career coach, a wearer of many hats. And today I have Chelsia Durkee, and you are in the HR profession. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So today, Chelsea, I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit about your experiences in the disability world. But first off, please introduce yourself, what you do, where you're from, things like that.
Okay, thanks, Jacob. So my name is Chelsia, like you said, and I currently am in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was born and raised there. And I am a human resource professional, so I really care about employee engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is why I went into the field. And like I mentioned to you earlier, I just started a blog called Art of HR. So it's centered around putting the human back in human resources. And then in addition, I'm also seeking a full-time job as well.
That's awesome. On a real quick note, are you familiar with Brigitte Hassan?
I am. Yeah, she posts a
she
lot. She has a great website. Yeah.
she is massive, and she's like the HR guru.
Yeah.
I mean, I see her
Oh, yeah.
everywhere. Her content is amazing.
Yeah. No, I love her. Definitely. Everyone has to follow her. So.
Absolutely. So first off, can you describe your experience or like your relationship with a disability?
Yeah. So for me, I grew up with 2 younger brothers and they both have autism. So we're pretty close in age. So our relationship just growing up, it was interesting because we're close in age, but I kind of was, the caregiver, older sister to them. And I experienced a lot just looking at my family, trying to get them services. So, for example, special education, speech, physical therapy, those type of things. And at least back then, within our school system and everything, it was really difficult because we don't really have the money to pay for everything privately. We do have to rely on government funding. So as I'm sure you know, it with government funding, it can come and go, right? Depending on what the society values at the time. So
Right.
just my experiences overall were, I had some great experiences with friends who were very understanding about my brothers, but just being a young child, also bringing friends over to the house, like sometimes I would be embarrassed because they would have outbursts. They would be really loud. They would like throw things around and they weren't really trying to hurt anyone. But if you're just a kid and you're just trying to figure out what you want to do in this world, it's like, oh my gosh, like I don't want my friends here. So for me, I guess I had to reconcile that piece, like making friends who were understanding about individuals with disabilities. And it's interesting because one of my closest friends, so she also has family members that are disabled, but I never put it in my mind like, oh, all the people in my life understand about disabilities, about mental health. I'm not really processing that consciously. And a lot of my friends also work in social work, education, or HR. And I think it wasn't conscious either because, I saw my parents, they were trying to get services and they would say, like, no, they don't need it. They can't learn. And that was the hardest part for me because I was very protective of them. I just wanted to make sure that they're not being bullied. And it's not the children that bully them. It was actually the adults in my experience saying that, they can't learn, they'll never be able to talk, which is not true. Although one of my brothers, he is nonverbal, but he absorbs information, he can understand, he processes things really well. But people were acting like, oh, well, he doesn't understand. But that's not true. It's just maybe they don't understand how he perceives information. And he does communicate with nonverbal cues, sign language, and everything. So luckily, I'm pretty fortunate because my parents were very strong advocates, especially my mom, who didn't work just to be able to take care of both of them. And so she really pushed to get services from our school district and everything. So that was my experience growing up as a child. Then as I got older, I actually got a degree in social work. And I, again, was thinking that I want to help others because I did have some good social workers in my life. And I actually worked with clients with developmental disabilities. So for me, growing up with uh, siblings with autism, definitely I could relate to a lot of the parents, a lot of the family struggles that they were going through. So it was a good experience for me to be able to give back to that population.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's one of the best, one of the driving forces that people go into those types of professions, special education, OT, PT, social work. I am a special education teacher. I don't know if I mentioned this in the beginning. So I grew up with a learning disability since birth. So like, I totally have been through the ringer with like, with my career, with school, had an IEP. I've had the whole gamut. I mean, I had like accommodations and modifications in school, things like that, not as intense. I also I have a twin sister and an older brother, both of typical development. So I can somewhat sympathize or empathize with you in terms of like the parent perspective. It was definitely a different scenario because it's like typical versus atypical. So that was always an interesting dynamic for me. But yeah, I mean, something you said earlier was very interesting because you said, your friends would come over your house and you'd always wonder like how they would treat your siblings or if they would like make comments or whatever. Would you ever have to like, I feel like a lot of people, it's not that they're cruel. I mean, some people are just straight up cruel, but sometimes they just need an education. Like sometimes I feel like they just have no idea what the symptoms are, like what are the basic behaviors, things like that. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like people weren't necessarily trying to be cruel in most cases, but they just really didn't know. And it's also hard to explain what autism is when you're a kid. It's they don't really have much exposure. And I think within my elementary school, I didn't really see too many students in special education. And I think it could also be because those students are sheltered because they definitely had a special ed class, but they're not mainstreamed or anything.
Right,
So I
right.
think now, although we do have to come a long way, people are more aware because there's more research out there and there's just less of a stigma than when I was growing up. But yeah, I remember explaining to them like, oh, they're not harmful and those type of things. And just explaining like, oh yeah, they can't express themselves verbally. So sometimes like they'll make noises, to express
Right.
themselves.
And so exactly. So I feel like it's like some of the behaviors need to be explained.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, they do hand flapping because of X, Y, and Z. Or, they don't like high pitched noises because of A, B, and C. It's just like, I feel like autism research has come a long way where a lot of the things have rationale
Exactly.
versus back in the day, decades ago, I mean, not even students with autism, just like people with disabilities were like institutionalized. I mean, this was decades ago,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I mean, I totally agree. Things have definitely come a long way. Still a long way to go. I would definitely say that. I also wanted to ask, what recommendations do you have like to increase disability inclusion in the workplace?
Yeah. So I think to your point about disability inclusion and just education, I think that as employees, as HR people, managers, just anyone in the workplace, they do need to be educated about what disabilities are and aren't, because I think that a lot of people within the workplace do have a disability. It's just they may not have disclosed it. They don't fit the natural stereotype of it. They have an invisible disability. So I think people need to be aware that when we're bringing up disability inclusion, we're talking about, we're trying to include the current people that you work with, the coworkers that you're working with right now. But I think we also need to be more intentional about recruiting more individuals with disabilities. For example, I think that if a lot of jobs are posted online, then it can limit some people who may not be able to access the computer, right? So I think it's just looking at those different pipelines and assessing, are we really just catering to the typical population? And I think when you build up a culture where people are able to express that they have a disability, then it definitely makes it a lot easier to recruit people, to retain employees, and just makes the culture more positive and engaging for everyone overall. I think one key recommendation that I have, at least in California, we do have the Department of Rehab, essentially job coaches where that partner with individuals with disabilities. That's a key pipeline. There are people that are talented, they need jobs. Definitely, if you want top talent in your business, you do need to consider individuals with disabilities, because I'm sure you've noticed that a lot of people with disabilities think differently, they process things differently, and that can actually be an asset. So I think partnering with those nonprofits, as and also having mentorship programs. So one thing that I've noticed with some companies is that they have employee resource groups, or ERGs. And that's kind of when an organization is at a certain stage where they've already had buy-in from leadership and the top down. So I guess what I should say, before doing any disability programs, what you need is buy-in from leadership, from executives, from managers, from employees on why people with disabilities are a valuable asset, that they are capable, they do want to work. I think just having those basic facts so that everyone's aligned and on the same page. Some people may not, be aware of that because they have never thought about it.
Absolutely. What's funny is, like what you just said, stakeholders, they need buy-in, they need proof, a
Yes.
concept, whatever. There are so many CEOs with disabilities. For
Yes.
example, Richard Branson, CEO of Virgin.
Yeah.
He has dyslexia. He's always had dyslexia. Charles Schwab, investment firm, learning
Mhm.
disability. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. However, invisible disabilities, right? So now, like very successful people, I can imagine, Elon Musk, big guys in the tech sector,
Mhm.
perhaps may have a disability of some sort. Who knows, right? But I think putting it in that like positive light, they're very
Mhm.
successful.
Yeah.
I always like to say that, every time I'm thinking about disability, a disability is not an inability to do something. I
Yeah.
think it's just an opportunity to go along a different path than everyone else. And on that path is, in my opinion, where innovation exists. This is where
Mhm.
like light bulbs come off, light bulbs turn on, innovative ideas, new, different, novel ideas come into play. And that's why I think, people with disabilities need to be heard.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I think that a lot of employees with disabilities, perhaps it's undisclosed, it could be your most creative, innovative people that are just able to think a little bit differently because they have to,
Right.
and because it's that's also why they were hired.
Right. And it's not, and I wish the word disability could be replaced with like differently abled.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
What about, what do you think, or like, what do you wish the general population would be more aware of in terms of people with disabilities?
So I would say, first I'll address it from a workplace standpoint, and then second from a more personal note. So in the workplace standpoint, if you are looking to include individuals with disabilities and you're creating those programs, you have to include the stakeholders, which are the people that have disabilities, because there's so many programs out there that can be really fancy. They have all the evidence-based practice, but if it doesn't include the employees that are on the receiving end, it can actually make them more disengaged. So just remember, you're not the expert. You do not really understand. For example, I do not have a disability, so I am an ally. I am not going to say that I am the one that can do everything and all the detailed stuff. Perhaps I'm a subject matter expert on HR, that is true, but you still need to consult with those stakeholders.
Right.
So
You also have direct experience with people with disabilities.
yes, I do.
Versus other people that have like maybe indirect, or they just know about the data, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. But even still, my experience, it mainly centers around developmental. But if it's more physical, I would say I want to learn more about that accessibility piece within physical. So I do feel that although, I do have a lot of exposure and experience, I still always want to consult with those stakeholders because each person, as we know, is different. And then on a personal note, as we were just saying in our conversation, that people are capable, like you were saying, they're differently abled. I think also just making sure that when you have someone in your life that has a disability, not to make assumptions, ask them questions, be curious, and don't assume that they're stupid or dumb because they're doing something differently. There could be a reason behind that, like we were mentioning. So
Absolutely. And that actually reminds me of a Albert Einstein quote. Um, Even a genius asks questions, right? Like everybody asks questions. Like, don't think you know everything. Not you, I'm just saying people in general, right? Like
yeah.
should always be inquisitive, always ask questions. Don't assume, and like nobody should assume they're the smartest person in the room. My last question I want to ask, and you kind of you wrote this here, like what's the main takeaway you want to give? I kind of want to flip that a little bit and say if you could put a saying on a bumper sticker so the rest of the world can see, right, as you're sitting in traffic or whatever, whether it's to the population of people with disabilities or the general population, what would you want it to say?
That's a really good question.
It's similar to what you said, like about a takeaway, but I just thought I'd throw a bumper sticker in there.
I guess disability inclusion is a human right because first and foremost, individuals with disability, they're human. So I think if you're including an individual with a disability, forget all the business outcomes,
Right.
Forget all the data and the jargon. You're just being a decent human. So just remember that people are human, right? First and foremost. So look of them as a person. That's what I would definitely focus on for the bumper sticker.
Absolutely. And kind of like what you just mentioned, to touch on, like, I mean, you being a social worker, a former social worker, like with IDEA, the public law, it's not disabled individuals, it's individuals with disabilities. So there's this whole notion of like individual, like person-centered language. So like the person comes before the disability. It's not a disabled person, it's a person with a disability. So I totally agree with you on that front. Anything else you wanted to leave with the audience? Some really great topics too, really great points.
No, I mean, that pretty much covers it. I would just wrap up with saying, remember to always be curious. If this year has taught us anything, I mean, I know it can sound cliche, but just remember that we really are all connected. So just be conscious of the way that you're treating people. And to your point about the language that you're using about yourself and other people. So I guess I'll just end with that.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, well, thank you so much. So once again, this is Jacob Levy from Potabilities, episode number 4. I have Chelsia Durkee And Chelsia, do you want to just mention your blog real quick?
Sure. So you can actually look at my blog. It was launched this week. So it is at www.artofhr.org. And over there, you can connect with me. You can also go to my LinkedIn page, which is just linkedin.com/Chelsia Durkee. I'm sure Jacob will put that information. And I also have a few documentary recommendations too about autism if anyone wants to learn more, and even some free resources to just become more aware and educated. I think it's important. And it's also just really interesting things to see how other people are living. So I'm happy to send that over to you, Jacob, so you can link that below.
Absolutely. I'll definitely include it in the LinkedIn post. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And this is Jacob Levy at Potabilities signing out. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.